Hello and welcome to Filmi Ladies. We are Pitu and Beth, and it is Labor Day weekend here in the US, which is a holiday that celebrates the workforce. So we thought it would be really cool to talk about movies in which in which the woman protagonist actually goes out into the world and gets a job and just navigates the world of the workforce. So the movies we're going to talk about today are Mahanagar by Satyajit Ray, which both Beth and I have seen. Umbartha, which is a Marathi movie by Jabbar Patel starring Smita Patel that I saw. And I think Beth also saw Shakuntala Devi, which stars Vidya Balan. So Beth, do you want to give our viewers slash listeners a quick synopsis of both Mahanagar as well as Shakuntala Devi, and then I'll tell them about Umbartha.
Yeah, I love that we have three different languages represented. I think that's a
Oh
first in our
yeah,
podcast, so that's great. And I know absolutely nothing about Marathi movies, so I'm very
right.
excited to hear about that. So I'll start with Shakuntala Devi, which is a biopic of this obviously real life figure who are maybe our Indian audiences are much more familiar with her than I ever was because I'd never heard of her until
Hmm.
kind of fairly recently. Um, I don't know if it's right to call her a mathematician.
Okay.
She is she's incredibly amazing at figuring out sums and other kinds of problems like that, like
Hmm.
human computer,
Right.
but I don't get the sense that she actually applied any of this in any way, nor did she do any theory. So I don't think she's actually a mathematician, but she's like a mathematical entertainer kind of, which is really
Okay.
interesting.
Yeah.
This film I watched because I thought, okay, here's someone with an interesting, if not line of work, exactly like calling.
Right.
If we talk about work as a calling, but then it actually is a lot more about motherhood and
Oh,
family stuff than it is about her work, I would
okay.
say. But it does also touch on issues of like earning your own money and financial security and kind of taking control of your own work world. So I do think it has some things to say, but I think primarily
Okay.
it's about motherhood and
Huh.
mothers and daughters. Um,
Interesting.
and then of course, Mahanagar, which probably most of these people listening have seen, is the story of a Bengali family in Calcutta in the 1950s, and they don't have quite as much money as they would like. It's a family where the husband and his wife have a little son. The husband's very aged parents, and then his much younger sister, played by Jaya Baduri, in her first film role, live together. So it's a joint family of sorts. Um, and the wife goes out to get a job and she becomes a knitting machine salesperson, like door-to-door salesperson. And the film is about how this impacts her and impacts her family, and I would say most significantly her relationship with her husband. And it is, as almost all of Ray's films are, incredibly tied to a time and place, and yet feels very able to reach me in 2023 in the United States. Like it's a one of these very timely yet also timeless things that he does so well. And if you haven't seen it, let me just tell you, like, pause this podcast and go watch that right now and then come back because it's an absolutely amazing film.
Yeah. Um, I've seen Mahanagar multiple times and it's awesome. I never actually saw Shakuntala Devi only because I read some reviews that said that it felt very caricaturish. And so that kind of like turned me off where I was like,
I would agree. I think
okay.
I don't want to get too far into this, but I think I love Vidya Balan, but this is not her best work, I would say. I do think it's a little over the top in a way that doesn't make sense for what's
Mm,
for this film. I'm all for over the top in other situations. And like I rewatched The Dirty Picture a couple years ago and was like still amazing. And I do think Vidya Balan is the current reigning Hindi film queen of interesting jobs. She has so many films where she does interesting things. And there's actually a lot more of those in general than I kind of thought. Once I started kind of picking at it, I was like, oh,
yeah.
there's a lot. So I do want to watch Vidya Balan. I want to watch Niyat, this mystery that she
Oh,
had out this summer, which is the same director. It's a woman
mm,
director, Anu Menon. So I would like to support that, but I cannot in good conscience tell anyone to really go out and run out and watch this film. Maybe watch it on a plane. If someone else wants to watch it, say sure. But like
yeah.
it's not I don't know, but also maybe if you're more interested in depictions of motherhood than I am, then this might be up your alley a little bit more. But just know going in that it's, I would say that's kind of more what it is, plus opportunities to Vidya to sort of showboat as Shakuntala Devi on the stage doing her math tricks, which
Right.
is kind of fun. Like she's kind of chomping it up, but I can imagine that even if that's not what this real life person did, it works in the terms of like, this is a movie about being a performer in a
Right.
way, and it really does highlight that, and that's kind of fun. So
Interesting. So then the movie that I also watched was rewatched was Umbartha, which is 1982, and it's based on a book called Beghar, and it's really interesting. So it has Smita Patel in the lead, and she plays this lady that is also in a joint family, and in her family, everyone actually does have a job. Like her mother-in-law runs like 4 charitable institutions, like NGOs, basically. Her husband is a lawyer. Her brother-in-law is a surgeon, and she has a degree. I think she has like a master's in social science or social work, and she doesn't want to work with her mother-in-law in the NGOs. No reason, she just didn't like it. So she decides to get a job as the superintendent of like a remand home, which is, if I'm not mistaken, a remand home is something in India where it's sort of this in between thing where they feel like the person who has committed whatever crimes or issues or whatever, they need to be placed in like a halfway house where they can be taught skills and they can get back, but they also do need like discipline and stuff like that. So they're not quite imprisoned, but they're not exactly out in society either.
right.
So she's the superintendent of that. And through the movie, it's so interesting. It's like Mahanagar, it's about her starting on this quest of like being her own person and doing what she wants to do and apply her degree and stuff. And she quickly finds herself in this completely different world, which is completely run by women, and where she's a superintendent, but often it feels like she has no power whatsoever. She's also sandwiched between these women that technically are destitute and yet wield so much social power within the confines of that place. And on the other hand, like the committee members who are basically people who have no connection whatsoever. Like there's a journalist, there's like a really old senile guy, and these people that make real huge decisions impacting the halfway house, but they don't give a shit. So she's kind of having to deal with their apathy as well. And then it also basically looks at the impact that it has on her marriage, because she has to actually like move to that town where the halfway house is, because it's too far from where her family actually lives. So it's interesting. It's like Mahanagar. You see the impact that it has even on their marriage. And one interesting parallel between both films is that the husbands are such green flags in the beginning, and
In
then
the beginning.
eventually you start seeing like it's so funny, like there's a taunt in Mahanagar that the husband says to Arti that is almost identical to the taunt that the husband Girish Karnad says to Smita Patel in this movie that was made 20 years later,
20 years
where
later. Yeah.
yeah, where that taunt is basically to the effect of, you've changed so much. You started working and you've changed so much. And the way it's said, that's not a compliment. It's not like, oh, I
Yeah.
love the woman you've become. It's more like, if only you were the woman you were before. And it's like, yeah, that's what jobs do. When you go out into the world and you learn how to navigate the workforce, and
Yeah.
learn how to navigate the world of like coworkers and bosses and competitors and stuff like that, it does change you on a fundamental level. But the husbands can't tolerate that, and they go from like green flag to orange flag to red flag, and you can see that happening in the movies. So what
Mm.
about what would you say is like an interesting, not message necessarily, but what about the character's journey in Mahanagar is the most interesting to you?
Oh gosh. I, everything, right? Like it's so hard. I find Ray's films in general I haven't written about many of them because I find it, once I start pulling at one thing, I want to say everything because like they're so rich and like well constructed that it's almost impossible to name a single thing. Um, but yeah, like you're saying, the interior changes of these women, um, in the case of your film, which I do want to watch, it sounds fabulous. And
Mhm.
obviously watching Snita Patel is always a gift.
She's fire. I took so many screenshots.
Madhabi Mukherjee is, yeah, also fire. I would say as I was watching this film, and I have seen it before, I just kept thinking, why do I not hear more conversations in which she is put forward as India's greatest film actress? Because, and I think it's the Bengali thing, like has maybe, I'm not saying hindered her reputation. Her reputation is mighty, but also I feel like she deserves more widespread attention than I feel I have seen her get, at least in English. Like, she's every bit as amazing as anyone else that we've ever talked about. So anyway, so watching her face in any 3 seconds of this film is a journey, and you just see how she conveys so much about what this woman is going through and thinking,
Mhm.
and her principles. Like, I think the journey of her principles is what I would say, because we watch her stand up to her boss, we watch her stand up to her family,
Mhm.
um we watch her care for other people, we watch her care for herself, we watch her
Mhm.
care for her colleagues, um we watch her navigate cultural clashes, we watch her navigate power structures, we watch her navigate the actual city, like going out to go to strangers' houses and ring the bell, and you get a sense
Right.
of how hard that would have been for her. um Navigating class, navigating languages, because like people speak to her in English, but she answers them Bengali a lot. And you can tell she
Right.
understands the English, but she is, for whatever reason, choosing to answer in Bengali, for example. Like, there's just so much navigating that and growth that she has every split second of this film. And it's a perfect match of character and actor, I would say. Like, it's just um, and all the people who appear in Ray films are, for the most part, incredibly good, and he gets incredibly good performances out of them. But I don't think this would have been as good with Sharmila Tagore in it,
No.
for
Mm-mm.
example. And she would have been a little too young at this point anyway, because this is
Right.
1962. I misspoke. I said 50s. It's a little later. But this is just absolutely a masterpiece. Like, it's just stunningly good. I believe our friend Sal, there's been a Twitter meme going around about name your top 5 favorite Indian films or something, and Sal
Mm.
was saying, well, at this very moment, if you ask me, I'm saying this. If you ask me an hour later, it may change, but I believe Mahanagar was on her list, and
Right.
I can see why. And sometimes with Ray films in particular, I want to rewatch them because I know there's so much there to get, but also sometimes it's hard because they are heavy hitting. Like Devi, I've only seen twice because it is, whew. And
Yeah.
Upper Sunsor, I think I've only seen 2 or 3 times because, again, it is such a gutting thing in addition to being
Yeah.
uplifting and everything else. So this one is a little easier to stomach in some ways, but it's a real roller coaster, because there was a point where, I mean, I knew what was going to happen because I'd seen it
Right.
before, but also you could tell me like something much worse is going to happen than in other ways, or like anything could have happened, because because there's so many threads in this little story. And even though, and I feel like they're balanced so well, so she's not the only interesting person in the film. She is, to me, the
Mhm.
most interesting, but everybody in the film is interesting. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I think you're right about the journey, and it's so interesting because like the movie itself is named The Big City, and it's like the movie begins with like the streetcars, the trams and everything,
Yeah.
and then it ends with a shot of like the tall buildings and these two like people, tiny like
Who
ants
like
just crossing the
disappear
street
into
together. Yeah.
yeah.
So it's like the big city just like swallowing people up in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And like every time I mean I've only seen this movie twice, but I'm always amazed at how i- timid she is in the beginning. Like when she's looking at those ads in the newspaper, like her husband is the one who picks out the job that she should apply for. She does not pick it. He's the one
Nope.
who says you should do this. He's the one. She's scared of like how is she going to handle the interview, and he kind of like has to boost her up and hype her up a little bit when she's in the office for the first time with the other sales girls, and then she gets a call and she's like, oh sorry, I have to take this call, and she takes the call, and again she's so shy and can't say a word. So she's a very mousy presence at the beginning, like not mousy at home, but it's
No.
like the idea of getting a job is so frightening to her, and she needs hand holding every step of the way. But you see her confidence grow And the amount of courage it would take that character to just approach a random stranger's houses and ring their doorbell or knock on their door and be like, hello, how are you doing? Here's this, because she's not even like a particularly bubbly character.
Right.
Another film character who I enjoy, who is a woman that plays a traveling sales girl, sort of, is Chashme Badur, Deepti Nawal's character in
Of
it.
course.
Well, she does the same thing. Like, she's selling like Chamko detergent, Tikia or whatever, and
Yeah.
but her character is naturally shown as bubbly and ebullient and vivacious, and she doesn't strike one as someone who would be terrified of
No.
having a conversation with a stranger. And yet, for this woman who has been a stay-at-home mom her whole life, presumably, like, since marriage, for her to knock on random people's doors, and you see the first time she knocks on the door, and this like English guy, I guess, this British
Yeah.
person, whoever, opens the door, and she's so terrified she can't say anything, and she just runs away. Like, it's so terrifying to her. But
Yeah.
in the movie, you see her confidence grow.
Yeah.
And it's so fulfilling as an audience member, as a viewer, to see that, where you're like, yeah, that's right. That is exactly what going out into the workforce does. And it's the similar thing that you get to see in Umbartha as well. Now, Smita Patel's character in Umbartha is actually not shy. I don't think Smita Patel has played a shy or a timid person in her life. I don't think she knows what
You
those words
cannot.
are. Wow. I was thinking about the Suchitra Seth episode where you told me that one of the things you really love about Suchitra Seth is that she is always a woman. And that is exactly what Smita Patel is. Smita Patel was born a woman.
Can you imagine if those two had been in a movie together?
It would have been like an apocalypse. Like, I don't think we could have handled it.
I want that now.
But she's the same way. It's like, even when Smita Patel was like, I mean, she died so young. She was only 32 or something when she passed. Like, she passed actually 3 years after Umbartha was released. So young. But it's like, even in her movies where she's super young, there is so much fire in her, and she has such a backbone, and she just like looks at the camera and you're like, okay, I take that back. I'm sorry I said this thing to you. Like, I love her, but I'm also a little bit scared of her.
Totally.
So she does not play someone who is timid or sheltered in the way that Madhavi Mukherjee's character is. She is actually someone who has a degree. She went to Mumbai as a married woman to get a degree in social sciences, and then she came back, and then she decides to move to this completely different town, which is far enough away that it's not within commuting distance. And she decides to be a superintendent of this halfway house where some of the people there are like batshit crazy. All of them are women that have been wronged by society in some way. For example, some of the women over there are their only crime is that they're unwed mothers, but their families threw them out.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, what are they supposed to do? They have no job, they have no skills, and so they live there. So a lot of the people in there are like that. There's also like a lesbian couple in it, and when the inmates of the halfway house discover that they're lesbian, they've been spying on them because they're suspicious. Like, why are these two women sneaking off all the time? And they actually go up to the superintendent and they say, you need to throw them out. We can't have these like perverts here. And she sticks up for them, and she's like, that is exactly what society said about you. Society said you should be thrown out as well. And you want to throw them out? Okay. And there's a song in the movie, actually, it's called Chand Matala, which means the moon has risen. And there's these masked women, and they're actually like, there's this eye contact between the two women in the song, which is like a hint as to maybe they're not just friends. And then that song actually ends with the two women sneaking off. So, but even for a strong, independent, fiercely stubborn woman like Smita Patel's character in that movie, even for her, she's out of her depth. And in the beginning, she's very unsure, like, how is she supposed to handle these women who clearly have a power structure and a hierarchy of their own? How is she supposed to handle the outside world? How is she supposed to handle the committee members? Like, there's a scene in which there's like an internal investigation that happens on her, and there's an outside person who has to come and like determine if she did something wrong. And at one point she says to them that the way these halfway houses work is that you take women that no one has any use for and you just throw them away, and you pretend that you can just lock them up in these godforsaken places and forget all about them. Meanwhile, the world keeps impinging on them. You can't do that to them. The world is always. So she discovers that the previous superintendent was actually supplying girls to one of the local MLAs. And there's a
Mm,
scene in the movie where she like is working and she gets a call and she just answers it and she's like, hello, blah blah, and the person is drunk on the other
mm,
end, and it's one of the local politicians, and he's like, who are you? And she's like, I'm the superintendent. Who are you? And he's like, I'm MLA, whatever. And then he's like, well, anyway, and you can hear his speech is slurring. And he says, well, anyway, you should send like 2 new girls tonight to my house. And she's like, excuse me. And then it lands. She understands what he's saying. And she just slams the phone down because she's so terrified. And it's like, you see her journey as well.
mm,
Because as educated and as independent as she is, she lives in a bubble too.
mm-hmm.
And then she goes here, and it's like, oh my God, there is like all this craziness that is completely hidden under this veneer of like taking care of women. But there's so
Mm,
much exploitation happening that she had no idea. So you see her journey as well, which is different from Arti's
mm-hmm.
journey in Mahanagar, but it's still very like shocking. And I feel like for a lot of us in 2023, her journey would probably be a little bit more relatable
Yeah,
than Madhavi Mukherjee's, like at least for those
yeah,
of us who are educated and already have jobs, because
yeah.
even if you are those things, you're always going to be in a situation where you encounter something that you have never encountered before. And the question is, how do you deal with that challenge?
And I forget what you said just a few minutes ago exactly, but you said something about like, how do you deal with this committee? Like there's always a
Yeah.
committee, right? There's always a board or a,
Or like my favorite word, corporate.
yeah. And even maybe if there's not in your job, like if you have kids, the PTA or like the whatever, like there's always some group of
Or the
people
HOA or
who are
whatever.
supposed to
Yeah.
do a thing and don't do it or like have the wrong priorities or whatever. Yeah. Yeah.
My favorite thing, if someone wants to know why I can't do a certain thing, is to say, well, corporate won't allow it. And
Yep.
corporate is said like dripping with contempt and sarcasm.
Always. Always.
The suits won't allow it.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the families in this movie.
Yeah.
I find them so interesting because, like you said, Madhvi Mukherjee's character is not the only interesting character in Mahanagar. I've had such feelings about her father-in-law.
He's a piece of work. So
Such a drama queen.
those who haven't seen, he plays a retired teacher who is clearly used to being the most important person in the household. And his wife is, neither of them is in great health, I would say. She's, she is still like squatting on the floor, cooking and cleaning and stuff, even though she's, I don't know, 70 at least, I would
Yeah.
say. And he sits around and does these crossword puzzles and is annoyed. He needs new glasses and they can't afford them. And as a full-time prescription lens wearer, that's real. Like you need your
Yeah.
glasses, but he's just he's got a real ego. But I think if the subtitles are to be trusted and the way I interpret how the actors are doing this, by the end, he throws this big fit about her working and kind of in the process shames his son as well, right? For
Mhm.
like not earning enough.
Yeah.
He actually decides to go visit his former pupils to ask for money,
Yeah.
which he does with this argument of saying, was I not key to your education that led you to be successful as a doctor or a lawyer or whatever? And I loved seeing, I forget this actor's name, but there's an actor who plays a lawyer there. He and his wife are in Charulata also. And I was like, oh, those two. I
Oh,
love seeing that. They're the ones who like come to stay at the house and are like
okay.
kind of nefarious. I love those two. And that I can't remember either of those actors' names, but they're both great character actors from Bengali movies. But yeah, so this father-in-law, but he comes around in the end, I think. Is that
Yeah,
your
a
take?
little bit.
A little bit.
Grudgingly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
grudgingly, but he does see like the benefit of having this extra income and things like
Mm.
that. The little son is a little bit of a, he throws a little bit of a fit when his mom leaves the house, but then he gets over it and she brings him presents with her salary and he's fine.
Yeah.
the sister-in-law is, I think, clearly quite excited about this, right? And
Yeah,
like
she
thrilled
hugs
that
her.
her,
She's so excited.
yeah, and like looking at the want ads and is like, you should be a film star, you're so glamorous.
Yeah.
um
I screenshotted that and I sent it
yeah.
to Beth, and I was like, clearly, this is a precursor to Goody.
And here's the thing I
Jia
didn't,
Bachchan only knows one career, and that
right.
is film star.
Here's the thing I didn't remember in this movie. Am I right that Madhabi's or Artie's father comes to visit them when the bank crashes?
Hmm.
He comes over and says, doesn't he say, isn't that her dad? And he's
I don't
talking with her.
remember.
Yeah. So I
There
don't
is a
remember that.
gentleman who looks a little bit like Iftikhar. I was like,
Yeah, who
oh, it's
comes in and
Iftikhar.
says like, I only invested in this bank because you told me to, and
Yeah,
referring to her husband, because the work bank he works in collapses. They call each other father and daughter, but I don't know if that means they actually are, or if this is
right,
like, so that was really interesting, because if that was her father, she clearly comes from a much higher class than she is currently living, which I
right.
think adds
Well,
a really interesting wrinkle.
right. Well, I was just gonna say, well, I don't think he's her dad because he just came across as much more well-heeled, you
Right.
know? And so I was like, well, I don't think that could be her dad. And I mean, at least back in the day, like if this is a movie set in 1962, then they have definitely had an arranged marriage. And I don't know. I'm not sure if he's
I
her
don't
dad. I
either. So
just
if you,
assumed it was like an ex
it's a friend of
colleague
theirs
or
or
friend
whatever.
or
Yeah.
family
Yeah.
friend. Yeah.
Friend
Okay.
of the father-in-law. Yeah. So anyway, so that was interesting to think about. And if you know, please put in the comments what their
Hmm.
relationship is. Um, because then he also like follows her into the kitchen and talks to her. And it doesn't seem like a man you're not related to would like come into your
That is true.
kitchen, right? Because like she's still got
Right.
her palu over her head and everything. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's very, very interesting.
Mm.
I really lost the thread of what we were just talking about. I apologize. The fact that there's so much in
Oh,
this movie. These movies do this to me.
I think I'd asked you a question
Oh,
of
families.
what do you think about the family?
Yeah. And then so like I should talk a little bit about Shakuntala Devi, I think, because does have this
Mm.
emphasis on motherhood, but there's this, the daughter, also played by Sanya Malhotra, who's always nice
Oh.
to see. Um, the daughter really goes through phases of resenting having this very famous mother who's also a showboat, right? It's not just that she's
Mm.
famous, it's that she's a total attention hog. Um,
Mm.
and the daughter really wants to build her own thing. So there's this kind of complicated plot about the mother giving the daughter money to buy houses and renovate them and sell them, which is her
Okay.
line of work. Um, and I, the kind of that desire to create something of your own, I found that kind of moving, really, right? Like for both of these
Yeah.
women. And Shakuntala Devi is portrayed as having a fairly dictatorial father
Mm.
herself, who then she is very eager to get out from under, and
Hmm.
she has very little to do with him after, as soon as she's able to get out on her own. But she is, but he's the first in a string of men that she, you know has ties to for various reasons, who are complicated. And the film depicts her having two romantic relationships, one of which is a marriage, that don't go well. And they, to me, what I understood from that was that because there is some kind of issue about, even if not work, about, I actually found this really touching. They're in the first romantic relationship she has which is with a Spanish, I don't know if he's a mathematician, he's the Spanish guy she meets in London,
Mm.
who like coaches her to become a better performer and stuff. And he basically says to her, you don't need me. And she says some equivalent of like, is my love not enough for you? Like, you need me to need you. And he's like,
Mm.
yeah, I guess I do. And that is a very like real thing, I think, for especially heterosexual relationships, right? Like there is a thing where men often think they need to be needed. And if a woman is super competent and whatever, and finds herself with a man who's like that can be a real, it's not enough to want somebody. They need to be needed, apparently. So I thought that was really quite gutting. And she's really angry at him about that. And I totally understand
Mm.
that. And then the marriage she has with, um, it's a side note. This is her husband is played by Jishu Sengupta, a Bengali actor. He
Hmm.
shows up in the strangest of Hindi and then also like Tamil and Telugu films. His agent is the hardest working person in Indian cinema. He's all over the place. It's kind of amazing. Um, and that too, like she's, they have a child and it's hard for them to navigate who stays home. He's in the administrative service, so it's not like he has no
Mm,
career. He's got a fairly prestigious career himself, or at
yeah.
least one that he cares about and that has distinction to it. And they can't make it work. And like he wants them to have a home, and she loves to travel the world doing her shows, and like it doesn't work. Which also seems very relatable in 2023. And
Yeah.
it's like 19 in the 1970s in the film or so. So yeah, families, they're kind of a drag.
Yeah.
How does the
It's
family go in?
interesting. So it's interesting. Umberta is one of the things I love about this movie is that it's very subtle. It's
Mm,
not super hard hitting. Everybody in this movie is gray,
yeah.
with the exception of Smita Patel. So, for example, you would think that given her mother-in-law is herself a working woman, she's a widow, but she runs like these four NGOs, and she's powerful. Like
Mm,
there are scenes where she's like dictating letters to her secretary to like not do this or do that or whatever. And yet, even her mother-in-law does not support her doing this job because the job would require her to live away from home because it's not within
uh,
commuting distance.
okay.
So she says, I got a job too. I work too, but I never left my home. And it's
Mm,
almost as if like if you leave the home, you're changing that dynamic.
yeah.
And they're not okay with that.
Yeah.
And then even her husband is like, well, why would you leave home though? And he pretends to stick up for her. And he, to some extent, he does stick up for her in the beginning. Like he kind of like fights on her behalf with his mom. And he's like, no, she should be allowed to do what she wants. And what is the point of her getting a degree in social work if we're
Mm,
not going to let her, like, that's not okay. She should work, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, it's almost like there's also a sister-in-law in the movie who is portrayed as very nice, but she's childless,
mm,
not because she didn't want kids, but she just can't have kids. And she basically is like a mom to Smita Patel's daughter.
mm.
So when the movie begins and like they're having lunch around the dinner table or whatever, you see that other lady fawning over the child and giving into her tantrums, and Smita
Yeah.
Patel is like, what are you doing? Like, don't do that, don't spoil her. And then the child starts crying, and the sister-in-law takes her away inside to like console her or comfort or whatever. You later discover that that child is actually not that other woman's. It's not the sister-in-law's child, it's Smita Patel's child. And every
Mm,
time she tries to like be a mother to her, everyone's like, well, let it be. Your sister-in-law doesn't have children and she can't have children. Let her be happy with that child. What's it to you? It's like she's expected to share her child with this other person. And it's like so weirdly like enmeshed and sort of like codependent. You can tell she doesn't like that either, but she kind of has to say yes because everyone's
yeah.
like, oh, but that poor woman, she doesn't have children. Don't you understand how hard it must be to be her? You know? So it's
Mm,
weird. It's like there are these characters that on the surface seem fine and they're actually not terrible, but they are problematic in their own ways. Like the sister-in-law, for example, is always supportive towards Smita Patel's character. She's
mm,
always her, but she's also really overstepping her boundaries and forgetting that she's an auntie and not a mother. So
mm.
it's kind of like hard to hate her because she really is a very well-meaning person and she's one of the few people who truly supports her, but at the same time she's getting something out of it
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
and there's a scene early on in the movie. So Girish Karnad is such a brilliant piece of casting because Girish
Mm,
Karnad just looks like a good guy.
yeah.
you know it's the same thing that Shashi Kapoor has. Like they have
Yeah.
is that you just can't believe that they're capable of being evil, which is why Shashi Kapoor in Junoon is so wonderful, right? Because you don't see it coming.
So
So
evil.
Girish Karnad is just a walking, talking green flag. And then there's a scene where they're all like relaxing around in the lawn in the evening, and they're just talking about their day. And these are professionals talking about the day. So the
Mm,
brother-in-law is talking about a cesarean delivery he had to do that morning because he's an OBGYN or whatever. The mother-in-law is talking about the social work that she's been doing. Everybody is talking about work, and Girish Karnad says something to the effect of, well, I'm defending this like rape accused person, and Smita Atta is just like listening to him and not reacting.
mm.
And the sister-in-law says, okay, so did he actually rape that woman? And he's like, oh, there's no doubt he did. I'm pretty sure he did. And they're like, and no one contradicts him. No one says what the heck. But
Right.
Smita Patel is, you can see her expression. She doesn't say a word, but she goes from just like listening to being like, huh, to being like, what, like,
Mm.
and she doesn't say a word, but you can see in every expression how contemptuous she is of him. And he basically comes up with his strategy of how he's going to defend his person who has committed the rape. And he basically says, well, our strategy is very simple. We're just going to paint the woman as very immoral, and she was just like asking for it, and also it's the clothes she wears. And he says it so casually, Beth. I was infuriated. I wanted to throw something at the TV. And here's the best part, right? Smita Patel's character is the only one whose face is registering the horror that you as the viewer are feeling.
Wow.
The mother actually cackles out loud, and she says, oh, you're just such a brilliant lawyer, like, oh my god. And I was like, the heck is wrong with you? So it's so interesting. It's like you see them, and from the outside they just seem like this very like educated, well-heeled family, just like, society, and like, we're so important and all of that. And then they start talking, like, holy shit, you are corrupt as heck.
And a
So
very
it's like,
recognizable sensation in the 2020s, isn't it?
yes, absolutely. Where it's
Education means
like,
nothing.
no, it's just like such a wolf in sheep's clothing kind of like
Mm-hmm.
moment. And
Mm-hmm.
this is like spoiler alert, but at the end of the movie, basically Smita Patel decides that there's no place for her in this home. She just can't.
Mm.
And Girish Karnad basically tells her that in her absence, he has started seeing another woman. And he, of course, justifies it by saying that his needs were not being met since Smita Patel was out of town. Yes, I definitely had another moment of wanting to break my television at that point. I had many violent thoughts. Um, and at the end, basically, the last scene is Smita Patel just like packing her suitcase with stuff. And the last scene is her in a train, and the train is just like going, and the scene, it like from afar you can see it's like the darkness of the train and the
Mm.
light coming in through the windows, and she's just looking out the window at like the fields and everything outside. And then it pans in closer, and you see her face, like a close up, and her
Mm.
face, which has been blank all along, there's like a slight little smile on it, and that's how the movie
Wow.
ends. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
It's such a the
Whew.
movie is such a roller coaster. And I love the title of the movie too, because Umbartha in Marathi literally means the threshold. So it's neither,
Ah.
it's technically that first step that delineates the house from the outside. So it's not quite the outside, but it's not quite the inside either. It's that stepping stone that is the home, because that is where she's stuck.
Mm.
It's like she would love to have it all, as we would all love to have it all, but she realizes that she can't have it all because her family will not let her have it all. They
Mm.
really are the ones that are the obstacle for her. And she either needs to pick her home and family, or she needs to pick this new family that she's created with the women in the halfway house who are nowhere close to being her equals. But she feels so much more love and camaraderie for them, and they respect her in a way that her own family and her own husband never will. And in a way, she has to make this choice, and that's the choice she chooses. So I found that very interesting too, the question of, can you have it all? Because I feel like that's a question that
Yeah.
makes women even today.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
can you have a home? Can you have a family? Can you have children? Can you also have a career? And while people would love to have it all, a lot of times they're not allowed to.
Yeah. No.
um, that is one thing that is different in Mahanagar, where
Yeah.
it's like the relationship goes up and down and up and down. But then towards the end, he kind of like sees the light. And I love that scene where she just like holds his hand and looks up to him with her beautiful, like, doe eyes. And then you see them walking hand in hand. And he says, what are we going to do? Neither of us has jobs. And she's like, well, it's such a big city. And the camera pans at the tall buildings. And she says, we'll find something. And then they walk across the road hand in hand. And I love that for her. I love
Yeah.
that in her case, it does seem like her husband has come around and
Hmm.
she can have it all. But
Hmm.
in Murtha, she definitely can't have it all. She
Yeah.
needs to choose what she prefers. And I like that in some ways Umbertha's ending is much more desolate
Yeah.
than because in Mahanagar they're together. And in Umbartha, at the end, she's on her way back to the halfway house. Um, and I like that both those viewpoints are so different, because it's not one size fits all.
Yeah. I feel like the in life, as in these films, to have it all, if by it all we mean a career, a home, and a family that involves a spouse type person and children,
Mm-hmm.
your partner has to be an actual partner.
Yes.
And I think that's true in real life as well, right? So like
Yes.
a woman on her own who does not have actual participation from a partner cannot.
No.
And probably
She's
a
just
man
not.
can't either, but because women are assumed to do all the work, to be that, to be that partner, it's just assumed that that's, how it'll go, obviously. So when it's women, that is not a given in any way. And, like obviously all those statistics coming out of the pandemic about how women picked up inordinately more of dealing with homeschooling kids and all that kind of stuff that
Mhm.
happened, and more housework and whatever, even though they too were trying to work from home and everything, so it's still a problem. So
Yeah.
yeah, and I feel like the
Actually,
end of Mahanagar does show him being a partner, and
yeah.
I'm not confident that there will be no wobbles. Obviously, I think there will be
Right.
some wobbles. It's a deeply patriarchal society. They still got that
Mhm.
father-in-law to deal with, who's coming around a little bit, but is still going to be who he's going to be, I think. Um, Although I suspect he's a little bit chagrined by the end because it becomes clear what he's been doing. And so I suspect he's maybe a little embarrassed or something. But anyway,
Yeah.
yeah. And then in Shakuntala Devi, they split up, that marriage splits up, and he finds a
Mhm.
way to, eventually they find a way for him to still be involved as a father to the daughter, which is important and is important to both of those people. So I'm glad that they figure that out. But he is not, they don't find a way to have a partnership. And I don't think it's just his fault, but they do not figure it out. And
Right.
he actually says, I learned a long time ago with your mother, he's talking to his daughter, with your
Mm.
mother, that she's a storm, and just don't, there's no point in trying to fight it. She is who she is. Um,
Mm.
and for him, it sounded like he couldn't, be a partner to that. And it's kind of presented as though like it would take a lot to be a partner to that. She's a lot.
Mm.
um, so yeah, it takes very willing participation.
It's so funny. It reminds me of what you said about Suchitra Sen in that episode, where or was it a different episode where we were talking about movie characters we would be friends with? And yeah, and then I was surprised because you did not name a single Suchitra Sen character as a character you would want to be friends with. And I was like, that's surprising. And you were like, no, it's not. Like, she's a lot.
She's a lot.
Like, her characters are great to watch on the TV, but
You're
I don't
glad
want
they're
to be
out
friends with
there.
them.
Nope. Nope. Too much drama.
That's so funny. So one movie I recently watched, which I do recommend, I did not find it caricaturish, unlike what Shakuntala Devi seemed to be from the reviews, was
Mm-hmm.
a movie called Tarla. It was direct to streaming, and it stars the wonderful Huma Qureshi in the role of Tarla Dalal, the cookbook
Yeah.
author. And from the trailers, I was afraid it would also be like cartoony or caricaturish. It actually wasn't. It was a really good movie. And in that movie, and it's based on the real person, of course, in that movie, the husband's character, I forget the actor's name, but he was lovely. And in that
Mm.
movie, he loses his job, and Tarla Dalal's career like takes off. Like, she becomes this amazing cookbook author, and she has fans and everything. He very graciously learns to sort of take a back seat, and
Mm.
he kind of allows his ego to not take over, and he starts becoming a much better husband to her and a much better
Mm.
father. So that was a very interesting thing to see. Like, he was a green flag from the beginning anyway, but he
Nice.
kind of like stayed a green flag, and he like stepped up. And it's very realistically done. Like, there's definitely a few scenes where he kind of indicates how it hurts his ego that he's lost his job at the mill, but he is trying to get a job, and he's struggling very hard and not find it. But she's the one who's really earning the money and keeping the bills paid. And he does admit in a scene where he says something to the effect of how sad he feels about that, but he kind of like gets over it, and he says, but I'm still proud of you. So that character actually really brought a smile to my face. And now I don't know if this, the problem with biopics is that anytime you have living members of that family, a lot of times they're going to want you to whitewash it. Biggest example of rubbish whitewashing being Sanju. um, But so I do wonder, like, if the real life Mr. Dalal was actually as lovely as he's portrayed in the movie Tarla, but that's a
Mm,
good example of
mm.
like a male character like stepping up and just like trying to shed some of his older, stupider sort of notions. So it's interesting. I think it's how many movies have we seen? Pretty much every movie in which a man is allowed to be a lot and it's okay, but a woman isn't allowed to be a
No,
lot. She's
course
allowed to
not.
just be
Yeah.
enough,
Yeah.
but not too much.
And it's probably not her definition of enough either.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking of Vidya Balan, like when I was researching which movie I wanted to talk about for this, like how many jobs has she done? She started out with Munna Bhai MBBS playing like a radio jockey. She was also a radio jockey in Tumhari Sulu. She was an actress in Dirty Picture.
She's a rocket
She's a
scientist, I
detective.
assume,
She's a
right? In
rocket scientist in Mission
Mission
Mangal.
Mangal.
She's a
Yep.
detective in Bobby Jasus, a movie I have not
Hmm.
seen because it got terrible reviews.
Oh, I have. It's
Um,
cute enough.
is it? Okay,
Like
I'll check it out.
I Ali Fuzzle is delightful in my opinion.
Right.
So like, and boy, paired her with the weirdest set of people as romantic
Really?
pairings when you look at her filmography. She's got a movie with Farhan Akhtar. That's weird. She has that one with Shahid Kapoor. That's
Oh,
weird. She
Kismet
has the one with Imran
Connection.
Hashmi. Like I
Oh,
don't know.
that
They gotta
was
get
so
her a
weird.
better romantic pairing, I guess. I don't know if that's part of, I feel like her career did not go post Dirty Picture where everyone kind of thought it was gonna go,
Yeah.
and blah, I don't know who she should be with, but it's none of those people. Um,
I feel like
oh,
I
I
actually
know who
like
she should be with. It's Parambrata
oh,
Chatterjee because in Kahani they
Kahani.
are amazing. Yeah, that's who she needs to be paired with.
I actually prefer Vidya Balan without any kind of male
Well, yeah,
accoutrement
exactly. Well, heaven
because
forbid we have that.
yeah, because two of the movies that I really enjoyed her in were Jalsa and Sherni, both of which I
Right.
recommend. Jalsa, she plays an like a journalist, like a TV reporter
Mhm.
person, and she was so good in it. And she's paired up with Shefali Shah, who plays her like cook, I think, cook, housekeeper sort of person, amazing. And both of those are women who are doing jobs, and it's so
Yep.
good. And in Sherni, she plays like a wildlife officer, and they're on the hunt for this Sherni who has
Yeah.
supposedly turned into a man eater or whatever. And it's like all these movies where she has these jobs, I just love it.
Yeah. Yeah. She's
Like
got a good run.
she didn't have a job in Pernita, did she? Was
Don't
she
think so.
didn't she like try to become like a secretary or something in Parinita? Like she tried to
I don't
apply for something.
remember.
I don't know. But I love all the jobs that Vidya Bala does. When I was Googling like movies in which like the woman protagonist has a job and her career is actually like central to the
Yeah.
theme of the movie
Yeah.
and not just like, oh, she has a job. So I have to shout out to one of her subscribers, Nemo, who made such a good comment that I was just like, huh, you are so right. So one of the YouTube comments they wrote in our review of Rocky or Rani Ki Prem Kahani was that they said they have observed that in Karan Johar movies, even if a woman has a career, they never show her working, with the
Yeah.
exception of Zinta in Kabhi Alvida Na Kehna, where she's like a fashion editor. So they kind of sort of have like one or two scenes of hers in like the magazine office or whatever. But otherwise, even if someone well, half the time they don't have a job, and if they do have a job, they don't really show them doing the job. So she said
Mm.
one of the things she loved about Rocky Rani Ki Prem Kahani was that they actually showed Alia Bhatt had a job, had a career, and actually showed her in that work setting. And I was like, oh my God, you're right. Because that then made me think of all the movies I've seen, like Yash Chopra movies or whatever, where the woman in question does vaguely have some sort of job or profession or something that she does, but you never actually see her doing it. For that matter, you never see the men doing their job either. Like I was thinking about K3G, where Shah Rukh either works somewhere or has a business. I'm not even sure what, but you just have these scenes of him
Right.
like there's just scenes of him with his like laptop bag and he's going or suitcase and he's going
And it's
somewhere
like
and then
successful enough
coming
that he
back.
can live in London with this
Yeah,
big family and like he's rich in London. So like that's not
yeah.
easy.
But like, what does he do? I don't even know. Is he a businessman? Does he work somewhere? What does he
His
work
job is pyramid.
at? What do you mean his job is
His job
pyramid?
is Egypt song.
Oh, that is true. Like Can Beach. His job is to do this, actually.
His
And
job is
you know
arm
what?
fling.
It's fine if Shah Rukh does not have a job. I'm totally okay with Shah Rukh not having jobs because I just want to watch him. Um, cool. Another person who's been doing a few jobs here and there is actually Alia Bhatt.
Sure.
So there was Gangubai Kathiawadi,
Yep.
there was Razi where she was a spy. So
Hmm.
she does a few of those as well.
Hmm.
Still not like the Vidya Balan level of like being a
She'll get there.
professional.
I mean, Rani Mukherjee has had an interesting run as well, right? So there's No One
Oh,
Killed Jessica, and
Mardani.
my very very favorite Mardani, right, where her job is incredibly crucial to the. I mean, that's
Yeah.
that's very much part of the film, and her kind of ethics around how she handles that and all are
Yeah.
important. So
She was
yeah,
a teacher in Hitchki as well.
yes. Oh, I love
I
that
have not seen that
movie.
movie.
It's
Oh,
really
okay.
cute. I have a big soft spot for teacher movies, so I can see how
Right.
if you don't, it may not be, but I thought it was really cute. And
Okay.
like it's a chestnut, it's a very well done chestnut. So like that, if you like that formula, like
Right.
go for it. I would say it's super cute. She's so,
Okay.
I love her so much. She's so good. Yeah, there's a lot more interesting jobs, interesting portrayals of women with jobs than I would have thought. So like this was fun to think about. And you could do, when you started talking about Smita Patel, I was like, Bhumika, because that's one of them.
Yes.
Whoo! I have
Oh,
not seen a ton
amazing.
of her films, but that's one I have seen, and utterly mind blowing.
Yeah.
You could do a really interesting discussion of actresses being the point of movies, and there's so many of those. But yeah, there's just so many interesting
Yeah,
portrayals out there,
I
really.
kind of one of the reasons I didn't choose Bhumika for this episode was or Dirty Picture or anything is because I kind of wanted to stay away from like work portrayals where the person in question portrays either a performer or an actor or a
Mm,
model or anything like that. Not because I have anything against those jobs, like that's fine. I just feel like Bollywood has a tendency to um, glamorize that and
sure.
almost makes it seem
Yeah.
like you can either be like a stay-at-home mom or you can be this like actor person, but God forbid you should get a job where you're just a secretary, which is
Right.
fine.
Right.
Or like which Vidya Sinha played, I think, in Choti Si Baat and like movies
Right.
like that where she goes
Right.
to work, but she
Hmm.
doesn't necessarily do. I think Devi was also a secretary in Chandni, right? Like she's Vinod Khanna's secretary in that movie.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
So it's like, God forbid, someone should just be like, they could be a secretary or they could be, and I think
They could
that's,
be a revenge taking supermodel.
yes. I think the only, like, I support women having any kind of job in any of these movies. The one thing that really made me laugh, though, and made me go, no, that is never happening. There is a really bad Bebo and Akshay Kumar movie whose name I have now forgotten, but she plays Bebo plays a supermodel slash surgeon. It is very unbelievable. It is extremely unbelievable. I was like, I do not believe either of those jobs for her.
If you are listening to the audio only version of this, the silence that you just heard was me blinking in disbelief. This is ringing a very faint bell. I don't think I've seen it, but I feel like I remember this being quite the joke on the internet when it
Yeah.
came out.
It was like, it's bad enough you're playing a surgeon. As it is, we know how Beth feels about the Kapoors having any kind of medical degree, but this just takes it to a whole new level of Bebo.
Karina Ayala, and like in the Punjab, right? She's a
Pratap
doctor,
Punjab.
so that's fine.
Yeah.
I accept that.
Surgeon is still a step too far for me,
Surgeon
though.
is a step too
Karina.
far, and like face transplant surgeon is even
Yeah.
beyond
Only
that.
Chummy can do that.
We will always disagree in this one thing.
But that's the other thing too, right? Like it's like you can't have a normal job. You have to have a very glamorous,
Oh
like
yeah.
over the top kind of
Yeah.
job.
Yeah.
The other thing that I don't like is when they make movies, which I'm not saying those movies shouldn't be made. I just find it annoying when those are the only movies being made where someone is always cast as like a trailblazer. Like,
Mm,
oh, let's make a movie on Tarla Dalal because she was like a trailblazer. Let's make a movie on Shakuntala Devi because she was like a savant. Let's make a movie on Nirja because Nirja Panot is like a hero.
yeah.
Like, oh, side note, I actually met a lady who trained Nirja Bhanot at Pan
Ah,
Am. She was one of the
Wow.
training because she met me and then she was like, "Are you Indian?" And I was like, "Yes." And she was like, "Do you know Nirja Bhanot?" I was like, "I mean, I've heard of
I
her.
do not know
Like
her personally.
she's like a hero in India." And she was like,
Yeah.
"I trained her." And I was like, "Really?" And
What?
this was a woman in her like she's retired from Pan Am, but she flew for them for almost like 40 years or so.
Oh,
The
wow.
stories this woman could tell you so
Oh, I
fabulous.
bet.
I would love to like hang out with her and ask her all the questions. But she said like when she heard of the Pan Am hijacking and she heard of New Java Note and everything, she was like so heartbroken because she remembers her as this
Oh,
like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed girl in New York
yeah.
that they were like training. And
Wow.
yeah, really amazing. But my point being like they take these movies about these people where they do something really like larger than life,
Yeah.
and I feel like there need to be more movies where you celebrate people just having even like a basic ordinary job.
Yeah.
Because not everyone can do those like rocket
No,
scientisty jobs.
no.
And I think there is actually a lot of research that shows that if you have women characters having jobs in TV shows and movies and stuff where their job is important to them, it has a very big impact on
Mm,
young girls who are
mm.
watching. It's actually called the Scully effect.
Ah.
So young girls who grew up watching the X-Files and watch Dr. Dana Scully being a surgeon and being an investigator and like constantly fact checking
Mm,
Mulder and being the voice of reason and everything. A lot of those girls disproportionately later were interested in having a career in
mm,
STEM because Dr. Dana Scully proved that you could be a scientist and you could be cool and glamorous and intelligent and just like all the things, and there's a need to like normalize that
sure.
instead of you know just having men do that. So I
Yeah.
think that was like really cool too.
That's cool.
Okay, did you have any parting thoughts?
Not really. I think most of us have to work or choose to work in some way. And I think it's a very interesting, there's so much potential for good stories about that because it's such a way to, connect people to other people and other stories and all that
Mm,
kind of stuff. And like you said, it's out in the world and most of us have to deal with the world in some way or other. Not everyone, but most of us. And so I really, there's so many films that I really, really love that do have this as part of a significant part of their story, even if the point of the film is not the work. There's something important about the context that the work
yeah,
brings, so I'm glad for these.
it's interesting what you just said. It made me think of how in Mahanagar, she's almost shown as having no friends whatsoever.
Yeah.
And then once she starts becoming a sales girl, she starts making
Yeah.
those friendships. And then it's partly because of her friendship to that one girl, I forget
Edith.
the character, Edith. Yes.
Edith.
It's because of that, in part, that she ends up resigning out of a sense of
That's right.
loyalty to her friend. But
That's
she's
right.
not shown as having any friends.
No.
So her life is literally just her house.
Mm-hmm.
There's no going out. There's no,
Mm-mm.
and any of that. There's no
Mm-mm.
time for any of that, and there's no interaction with other women that are
No.
of your own age. And having friends, especially having women friends, can really like broaden your horizons in a way that just being with your family never can. Because that's
Yeah.
the other cool thing in Mahanagar. She's shown as like a traditional Bengali Hindu woman, and she befriends Edith, who is an Anglo-Indian girl, and
Mm-hmm.
you can see how it like flick certain switches in her head. Like when Edith offers her the lipstick and she says, "Oh
Yeah.
no, I could never wear lipstick." And she says, and Edith is so cute. She just goes, "Why? You wear red here. You wear red here. Why can't you wear red here?" And she's like, "Okay,
Yeah.
just a little, just very faintly,
And she's
but it's,
clearly got eyeliner, kajal on, right?
yeah,
So like she
which,
wears
yeah.
facial makeup.
So like, why not?" And she's
Yeah.
just like, logic point, and then she lets
Point
her
to Edith.
apply it to her. Yeah, so I mean that's really cool too. Even in like Umbartha, Smita Patel is not shown as having any friends whatsoever. One
Yeah.
assumes that perhaps she made friends in Mumbai when she went to do her
Yeah. In
master's, but
school.
they're
Mm-hmm.
not shown in the movie.
No.
And it's only until she goes to the halfway house that she ends up like having some sort of camaraderie and affection and friendship with all of these women who really like look up to her you
And
know
it's quite telling that we are having such an easy time naming women with interesting jobs or interesting portrayals of jobs in cinema. Much easier. That's much easier than it is to name films that focus on women's friendships. When we did that episode for Galentine's Day, right? Like there's a lot
Yeah,
more
that
of
was
the work
hard.
than there are friendship even now. So that's pretty telling now that I think
Yeah,
about it.
and that was interesting too because it's like part of the insecurity that the husbands in these movies and Mahanagar and Umbartha both have is that when they make that comment about, oh, you've changed, it's because they like this wife that they have that lives in this little bubble
Yeah.
because she's more malleable and more
Mhm.
controllable. But the
Contained. Yeah.
minute she goes out into the world and she starts experiencing things and learning things and meeting other people and getting new viewpoints, it's like, good Lord, we can't have that. What if she
Yeah.
gets
Nope.
brainwashed?
Right.
You know?
And like
So
in Mahanagar, when her boss drops her home in his car one day, you can see the family inside is like, oh, she's
yeah,
been in a car with a man who's not her husband. And
yeah,
oh gosh.
exactly. Yeah, but that also like makes me wonder, like, why aren't there movies on female friendships? I mean, you do see the friendships in the movies where they have jobs, but not otherwise.
My theory that I have developed just while you've been talking, so it's not very well thought out yet, is that women's friendships are primarily for themselves.
Yes.
And, even earning more money. Yes, there are things that the woman herself benefits from having a job, but in theory, generally the money is going to the household.
Yes.
And so that like that's okay. But friendship is just for her. So like that's not okay. Is my
Ah,
is my quick
that is
quick quick
very
take theory on that. If people wish to comment, I hope that they will. But
that is
I
very
suspect
interesting.
because even a romance is, the man is also involved, and ultimately, obviously, it's supposed to be sanctioned by a family unit and have children and blah blah blah. But like, friendship does not lead to children. It does not lead to financial gain for the family. It might, if we're dealing with a social climber situation, there might be that kind of benefit, but a more even friendship that's a genuine friendship doesn't provide any sort of status, financial, or is it
Yeah.
is it gain? So I suspect that's why.
Yeah. And it's also it could potentially also be detrimental
Yes,
to the other people in that woman's
absolutely.
life,
Yeah.
because how
Influence
many
coming
times,
in.
right, how many, so I have a joke with one of my friends where she calls herself the dump him friend.
We all need
Because
one of those.
yeah, because she's always like popping a bubble. Like anytime she has friends that are dating like questionable men, and she's like, "Ugh, girl, just dump him." Like, you know. And I was at Urban Outfitters the other day, and I saw a little baseball cap, and it literally said "dump him." And I took a picture, sent it to my friend, and I was like, "I'm gonna get you this for your birthday."
Yes. It's like, there are things when you look back at 30 Rock that you're like, ooh, maybe that was not a great joke. But the deal breakers skit that's ongoing in 30 Rock, I find so funny when Liz Lemon is like,
Mhm.
nope, deal breaker.
Yeah.
We all need a dump him friend because it applies to like quit that job or like,
Yeah.
you know,
The person who tells you to like cut your losses and
block that
move on.
person. Yep.
Yeah, but that's the other thing, right? Like the society, the social structure benefits from women being
Oh
compliant
yeah.
and obedient and
Oh yeah.
agreeing to all the things and compromising and giving too much. And sometimes
Mhm.
you need another woman, either someone who's your own age and has experienced a lot of the things that you have,
Mhm.
or someone who is older and knows how that shit goes down, or even
Right.
someone who's younger in whom you see those same
Yeah.
mistakes being made.
Yeah.
Like for
Yeah.
me, when I have any of like my 20-year-old coworkers or really young people that I'm training at work, there's sometimes that I'll hear them say the stuff that their boyfriend said to them, and I will immediately be that person goes, no, do
Yeah.
not say yes, so that is controlling behavior
Yeah.
and that is not okay. And you don't, and they're so shocked to hear me say that. They're like, no, he's just concerned. I was like, no, that's not concern, that's control.
Yeah.
But when you're 20, you don't know that.
No.
When you're much older, you get it and you see those signs and you're like, do not make that mistake, girl, you will regret
It's
it.
true. It's true.
Well, I think that concludes our episode.
Yeah.
We had so much fun talking about women who go to work, women who are part of the workforce. I'm not saying that if you're a stay-at-home mom or you choose to stay at home, that's not work. It is,
It is
but I
work.
think when you go out into the into the world and you encounter other people, I do think that has benefits that can really help you evolve as a person. And I think both Beth and I are huge proponents of that. If
And
you have
certainly
movies,
in storytelling, it, as depicted in films or used in films, right, that it opens so much that otherwise would not be there.
yeah, like from the four corners of the home to like the big bad world out
The
there
big
with like the
city.
wolves and the sheeps and all the things and the dump him friends and everything. Um, so if you guys have any movies that you would like to share with us, what?
I I meant to look for this and did not. So if anyone listening Are there films where, I'm sure there are, where women are labor activists? Like, are there women leading strikes? Are there women out there on the picket lines? I would be, or like trying to fight for better working conditions. I would love to know about those in Indian cinema, because I wanted to try to find something like that. And my quick Googling didn't get me very far. And then I was just trying to think through what I've seen. I was like, I feel like I haven't seen that, but I'm sure that's not exactly true. And I'm sure there are movies, even if it's less formal than a union, like women who are, because there's a little bit of that in Mahanagar, right? Like Edith goes in to ask the boss for raises, and
Commission.
RT also, fights for better money for herself. But I would love to know more about that. So if there's like labor unrest involving women and labor activism, please especially tell us about those films. Thank
Yeah, that would be very interesting.
you.
Yeah. I was just thinking, what is that? Isn't there a movie of Sally Fields where she
There
plays?
is. Yep.
Yeah, I was
Yep.
just thinking about
Quite
that. Okay.
famously. Yeah.
So, anyway, tell us what you think about all the movies that you want us to see or you've seen or how you feel about them. I think at some point, it would be fun also to do an episode about men at work. I mean, there's so many movies about men at work,
Yeah.
but there's still like some movies that we can talk about,
Yeah.
and they have their own set of like issues.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you for watching this episode. We hope you have a wonderful Labor Day weekend. I know that in India, a version of Labor Day is basically celebrated on May 1st. I
That's
think it's
all of the rest of the world does that, basically,
all
except
the
for the
world is
US.
May 1st.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, and maybe Canada also. US and Canada are September for whatever reasons that I should know
Yeah.
and do not. But yeah, May Day is the big one. So
Yeah, because May 1st in India is, I think it's called Rashtriya Kamgar Divas, which translates to National Workers' Day or something
there you
like
go.
that.
Yep. May Day is
Um,
the day.
so if it's May 1st, then, happy Labor Day to you in India. And if it's Labor Day weekend in the US or whatever, then happy Labor Day to you then. And actually, every day should be Happy Labor Day.
Seriously, every day is work.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for watching Filmy Ladies. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And we will see you next week with another episode. Bye.